Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's time to get started. Welcome to this webinar. This is a webinar about the imposition engine in pdfToolbox. It's part of the support webinars, but this is a topic that actually comes up relatively frequently. And the main questions that we get are, what can I use this for? What are the capabilities of this engine? And when should I use it? And when should I use other tools? And we thought that doing a session on that was a good idea. We're not going to go into all of the technical details during this webinar. This is supposed to be an overview of the technology and where you find things, where you find documentation, for example. So what are we going to cover? You can see a list here. I'm going to start by looking at where you find the bits and pieces of the imposition engine in pdfToolbox, and the fact that there are some easy to use specialized functions, and then next to that there is the full imposition engine. I'm also going to spend a little bit of time showing you and talking about what the building blocks of an imposition configuration are. And then I will show you, for example, the imposition debugger and how that works. And we will also talk about using imposition in the context of a process plan and how you can use that in the CLI. I will, at the end or in the middle of my demo, also talk or refer to some of the more complex or advanced capabilities of the imposition engine, but it's certainly not my intention to go into all of the details. You will already, by the way, find recorded sessions from last year's partner event on our website and on the callas software website. And one of those talks about dynamic imposition, for example, which is one of those advanced capabilities of the engine. So there is already some material available on that. But good, let me stop this. I had a very complex presentation today, 5 slides in total. That's perfect. So let me quit that and go to pdfToolbox immediately so we can look at some stuff. First of all, where to find this imposition engine? And well, under tools lives the switchboard, as you probably know. And when you look at the switchboard at the home page, there is one group here that is called arrange, and most of the functionalities that have to do with imposition can be found in this arrange group. That doesn't mean that there is no other functionality that also uses the imposition engine under the hood, but this is certainly where you find most of the capabilities. As I said in the introduction, there are 2 big ways to use the imposition engine in pdfToolbox. One is to use specialized functionality that does not require a lot of configuration and as a result is easy to use. The second one is using the full imposition engine, and both of these can be found in the switchboard. When you look at booklets, enup, fill page, step and repeat, and to some extent even reader spreads and split in half, these things all use the imposition engine to do their work, but they are very easy to configure. So if I would take step and repeat as an example, you can see that what I have is a number of variables that I can control. So I have some parameters that I can enter in these edit fields there. And if I have a file, the only thing I need to do to run this imposition, this step and repeat on the document that I have open is fill out the different parameters that are important for me. Like here, I'm asking for 5 millimeters of distance between the imposed ups on the final sheet. I'm also asking for cut marks to be added. 3 by 5 step and repeat. So all of these things can be filled out, and then clicking the execute button will do the imposition for me. And the result is that I immediately get a larger sheet with 3 times 5 stepped and repeat on there. And you can see the cut marks that were added. You can see that there is indeed 5 millimeters of spacing in between each of those. So that's very easy to set up, and the same is true for each of these special functions. If I open a different document, a multi-page document in this case, I could go back and look, for example, for Booklet, and Booklet will take this multi-page file that I have and will create in something that can easily be printed and then be folded into a booklet. So if I run execute, same thing, I get and look at the page numbers that you have at the bottom there, I get something that is easily used to create a booklet out of it. So let me remove those. So all of these special functions are equally easy to use in that fashion. You simply add the parameters that you want. You handle, you fill out the parameters, you click on execute, and that will do it on the file that you have open. There is a question that just came in that actually points to one of the limitations that we have in this engine, whether it's the full imposition or the specialized functionality. What you will see in pdfToolbox is that in most cases, the imposition engine will take one PDF file coming in and it will generate one PDF file coming out. So the imposition that I'm doing always works on a single PDF file. And when you look at this booklet functionality, for example, it means that all the pages that are going to form that booklet need to be in a single file in order for them to be usable in the imposition engine. Now, in pdfToolbox, there is a functionality to it's here called Organize Pages that allows you to create a single PDF document out of multiple PDF documents in a manual fashion. When you would look in the CLI, the command line version of pdfToolbox, for example, there is actually a merge PDF functionality in there. So that would make it easier or easy in an automated workflow to take 10 incoming PDF documents, merge them into one single PDF, and then run one of the impose actions to do the actual imposition on the PDF document that was created out of those different imposed or different incoming PDF documents. But the engine itself in pdfToolbox will always take one incoming PDF, it will do something with that, and it will generate an outgoing PDF. So those are the easy to use things. Of course, in some cases, you want to do something that goes a little bit further than what you have. I might want to do step and repeat, but these parameters that I can modify might not completely fit the bill. Maybe I want to modify the length of the trim marks that get added, for example, or I want to have a slightly different arrangement of the pages on there. Maybe I want to do an imposition where different output pages are generated of a different size, depending on. So there are a lot of cases where the built-in functions like step and repeat and booklet and an up are not sufficient for what you might want to do in a workflow. And for that reason, pdfToolbox also has this impose functionality. And impose exposes the complete imposition engine to you. You can write your own configuration files, and then those configuration files will determine what happens. Now, to show you the flexibility of that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my Penguin label file again. And in this general imposition area, I have two configuration files that I have previously created. So I have a list here. We'll see in a second what these are and where they come from. But for now, I have a config file for the imposition scheme and something for the sheet configuration. And I'm simply going to run this. And what pdfToolbox does is create an approval sheet, if you want, a proof file. And it does that by taking the incoming file that I had and by placing it into an area on a A4 document that I had previously prepared. Yeah. It's hard to call this even imposition. It's not really imposition, but it is the imposition engine that is used to create this approval sheet. And that is something that you will very often see with the imposition engine in pdfToolbox. On the one hand, it could be used for cases where we're talking about real imposition tasks, but in many projects, what ends up happening is that the imposition engine is used to do something that is not really strictly an imposition task. It is used to compose different pages together, to take one piece of a page and add it to something else, to place something on a larger sheet. So that imposition engine is used for things that resemble imposition, but not necessarily are imposition in the strictest terms. Now, it's nice to see that this is possible, but of course, the next question is, how does this happen? And the magic behind what happened here is in these configuration files that I selected in the switchboard. And as you can see, one is called imposition scheme, the other one sheet configuration. I can actually see what those imposition files are and where they live by clicking on the action button at the bottom of the switchboard here, and then selecting Manage Imposition Configs. And that will open up a folder, and in that folder, I have all the files that are being used. In my case, I selected this approval sheet 2 runlist file and the Sheetconfig file. When I refer back to pdfToolbox, let me position it so that you can see both of them. Sheet configuration corresponds to the file that is called approvalsheet.sheetconfig, and the imposition scheme corresponds to the runlist file that we have here. As you can see, there is a third file with that same name, and actually the name is exactly the same as the Sheetconfig name, but then it has the extension .pdf added. And that file is a background file or a template file. If I open that and I show you what is in there, you'll see that all of these static elements that I want in the background of this approval sheet are contained in that PDF document. And what the imposition engine did was create a new sheet starting with this background and then putting the incoming file at the right spot and using the right scaling factor in this approval sheet template. What you also can see that it did is there where it says customer and then has some blank space and date and has blank space in the background file, in the actual imposed file, those have been filled out. Okay? So that was also added using the imposition engine. Now, like I said, I'm not going to go into all of the details. This is not a training to create imposition configuration files, but I do want to show you how these files look. And to do so, I will open them in Sublime as a text editor. And what you can see is that I have two files now. This is the Sheetconfig file, and then I have the runlist file that we were talking about. I have two files that seem to follow some kind of scripted language. And that is, in fact, what it is, This is not JavaScript. It's not any other kind of scripting language that you will find anywhere else. This is a language that was developed by Callas a long time ago when the imposition feature was invented. And this language is used to define what the imposition engine is going to do. The Sheetconfig file that we are looking at defines what type of sheet is going to be created. And as you can see in comments here, each line that starts with a £sign is a comment line that is ignored by pdfToolbox. As you can see in comments here, it says that we're not defining a sheet size explicitly in this sheet configuration file. Why? Well, because we're working with this background file. And if we do that, then the size of the sheet that is going to be created is determined by the size of the background file. In other words, let me go back to Finder for a second. Because I have created an A4 sized PDF document, my sheet configuration is also going to generate A4 sized pages. What is then the important part in the sheet config? Well, there are two. First of all, what you can see here is a definition of the name that is going to be used in the user interface of pdfToolbox. It says approval sheet with background and then two. Well, if I go to the user interface, that is exactly what is shown in here. So that name field that we specify in the file is used by pdfToolbox to show this in its interface. And then the second part that is important in this file is what you see here at the bottom, these lines that are starting with the word slot. A slot in pdfToolbox imposition terms is a rectangular area on a sheet. And when we look at the imposition that was done here, then what you'll see is that there is an area where this penguin was placed. That's one slot. Then I have an area where the name of the customer was added, slot number 2, and I have an area where the date was added, and that's slot number 3. So the sheet config file doesn't say anything about what is going to end up in these areas. It simply defines rectangular areas that can be used from the other configuration file later. How is such an area defined? Well, on the help.callassoftware.com website, you will find full documentation on the complete language used for imposition. But actually, when you look at this file, it is not that complicated. And what you can see is that I have different terms, and each of these terms is separated with a tab character in between. So this is a tab character, separated file where the different values that I have are separated each time with a tab. And what are the values? Well, in comments, you have a list of all of the values that are specified for each slot. Let me show you some of the more interesting and important ones. This is the name of the slot, preview or customer name or date. Actually, this is not used by pdfToolbox. It is only here to make you understand afterwards what you were doing in this sheet configuration. The next bit is used. The next bit is a unique ID for that slot. And you can imagine why we need this in the run list that we're going to look at later, where we say what is added or placed into a particular slot. We need a way to identify what the slot is that we're interested in. Well, that is done by slot ID. You can give these slots any name as long as they are, or any ID as long as they are unique in this context. The typical thing that I do, naming convention that I use, is that anything that has a low number is used to place pages on the final imposed result. Anything that is a higher number, like the 101, 102, is to put additional information next to the pages. But of course, you're free to follow any type of convention that you want to do. The 4 numbers that you see a little bit further are also very important because those define where exactly that slot lives in this sheet that we are creating. And the order is left, so that's the distance between the left-hand side of the sheet and the left-hand side of the slot. If we look at where this penguin is placed, it would be the distance between here, the left-hand side of the sheet, and the left-hand side of where we also have trim marks in this particular case. And the 4 numbers define the left, the bottom, so again, the distance between the bottom of the sheet and the bottom of the slot, and then the width and the height. You can use millimeter, you can also use inches if you feel more comfortable using that. That doesn't really make any difference. Then we have how much bleed we want to show. Now, we've asked to show 5 millimeters of bleed in this particular case, but because our incoming file doesn't have any bleed, that's not something that we can see in the approval sheet that I use here as a demo. So pdfToolbox is not going to proactively add bleed to the file for you. That already needs to be there, and then I am basically telling it that it needs to show 5 millimeters of whatever bleed is already present in the file. For this type of job, the next 2 numbers are very important as well. If you would look at the comments, you would see that they refer to scale X and scale Y. In other words, scaling of the file that we're placing horizontally and vertically. And the only thing that this -1 signifies is that the file that I place, the page that I place in that slot, is going to be scaled proportionally until it fits in the space that I give it. Other values that I could put there are 100, 100 if I want to use the incoming page at true unscaled size, or I could do something like 25 or 50 if I want to scale it down to 25% or 50% of the original size. We can also rotate. We can control where in the slot this file is going to be placed, and I'm specifying center, but that could also be left top or bottom right or anything like that. And then there is also a definition of which trim marks I want. And you can see with the other slots that I have defined that the values are a little bit different. Of course, these values are different because they define where the slot is, but for those, I don't want any bleed. I want 100% of the size, and I don't want any crop marks in there. Yeah. So again, Sheetconfig defines which rectangular areas we have on a sheet, and how big that rectangular area is, and all of the different parameters connected to that rectangular area. And then the run list file, which you see here, is then going to determine how the pages of the incoming file are going to be placed into those slots. Now, there is a lot of logic around how the imposition engine in pdfToolbox works. And one of the important parts in that logic is that pdfToolbox defines variables when the imposition is started. And you see one of the important ones here, first page. When the imposition starts, first page is automatically set to the page number of the first page in the document. So normally that would be 1. There is another variable that is, and I will just type it in here, another variable that is called last page, which is set to the page number of the last page in the incoming file. Now, in my example, both of them would be 1 because I have a 1-page PDF document. What happens in the imposition engine is that pdfToolbox will continue to loop through these instructions until your script that you have comes to the point where first page is now larger than last page. And at that point, pdfToolbox assumes that all pages have been handled and it stops. And that is why you see this instruction here at the end of this script where it says increment first page. Take the value of first page and add 1 to the value of first page that we have in there. Okay. What do the other lines do? Well, again, I'm going to only highlight some of the important parts in here. The full definition of all of these terms can be found on help.callassoftware.com. But to just point out a few important bits and pieces. New Sheet is an instruction that tells pdfToolbox to create a new sheet, and that new sheet could be a blank sheet with a certain width and height, or in our example, it will be a sheet that uses this approval sheet background. Yeah? So new sheet creates something that has all the background elements, but nothing else. And then we're going to fill that in. And you can see this line that says place text, which is a command to place a certain piece of text into a certain slot. Slot 101, and then the value that is being placed in that particular slot. The same for slot 102, but there I use a built-in function that allows me to take the current date and format that in a certain way and add that to the slot. And then perhaps the most important line is this position page. Position page allows you to take a file from a page from the file that you're processing and place it in a particular slot. So what I'm saying here is that I want to place the first page into the slot with ID 1. These slot IDs, of course, all reference the IDs that we defined in the Sheetconfig file. And then these instructions together will place the text where I want it to be placed and will place the preview of the file onto this approval sheet background. Of course, when you start looking at real imposition configs that do more complex things, they will probably be more complex than what I have here, but the basic terminology and the basic way of working will exactly be the same. You will define sheets and slots in the Sheetconfig file, and then you will fill them in the Runlist file with these place text or position page commands that you use in there. Now, as I already said, an important part of the imposition engine is that pdfToolbox has variables that it defines and uses. And I pointed to this first page variable that controls how the imposition is going to work and when it's going to stop. There's a bunch of other variables that you can use. For example, I have a variable that is called crop mark length. And this is a variable that pdfToolbox defines, but that I can redefine. So I can modify the value of that variable. And when I set it to 5mm, for example, it means that the length of the crop marks that I am going to get is going to be 5mm. If I would change this to 2mm, I would get much smaller crop marks on the approval sheet. And that's the same thing that happens in this text block here. pdfToolbox defines the variables text size, color space, color values, font to determine what it is going to use to place this text into the slot. Well, the font that is going to be used is called Quadrat Sans Bold. It's going to use device CMYK as color space, and the color values are 0000, meaning white. And that's what you see on the approval sheet. The text is added in white. And the font size in this particular case is going to be 20 points. Yeah. Now, how do you know which of these variables exist and how to use them and so on? There are a number of options that you have. The first option is that you go look at the documentation again. Like I said, help.callassoftware.com, you go to the manual for pdfToolbox, and there is a whole chapter that refers to the imposition engine. The second thing that you can do is you can also open up the Runlist Debugger. And the Runlist Debugger is a let me see if I can make it appear. There we go. So the Runlist Debugger is this pretty awkward window that that shows up that has a lot of information about what you are doing in the imposition engine. On the left-hand side, you can see the lines of the run lists, and you have buttons at the bottom here to step through them. So basically run over the different parts of that, that run list. You also have an area where you see all of the different variables that pdfToolbox recognizes and uses. And what you can see is in this list, effectively, I have this crop mark length value. I also should at some point find these text size values in here. There you see that, and the text color space and so on and so on. So all these variables are defined in there. And when I step through the run list, you can see the variables being changed as well. You also have a list of the slots, you have a list of all of the different counters that pdfToolbox is using, and so on and so on. So all of the inner details, if you want, of the imposition engine are laid out in the Runlist Debugger, and as such, it can help you to, so let me cancel that, it can help you to understand what happens in an imposition that you're trying to put together. So if it doesn't work exactly the way you were expecting it to work, then you can use the imposition debugger, and if I should also switch it off once I'm done with it. You can use the imposition debugger to figure out why it might not be working. So right here in that same action button where we said manage imposition configs, it reads Runlist Debugger. Now, this is all good, and like I said, I'm not going to go into more detailed stuff at the moment. This is all very very interesting, but this is all manual, of course. When I have a file and I want to create a approval sheet with that, well, what I get is a manual operation, and that's very difficult to automate. So how do I automate that? Well, you could think that we need to do something with profiles, because usually what you do in pdfToolbox is automated using profiles, and profiles have checks and fixes. But if you would search for this, you'll find that there is no fix that refers to imposition. There are no imposition fix-ups. Instead, what happens is something else. I can create a process plan, and in a process plan, I can put a step that does an actual imposition. And to show how that works, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to my impose action on the switchboard, and I have set this up the way I want it. And we see the evidence of that on in the main window of pdfToolbox. It does exactly what I wanted to do with these settings. And what I can do then is I can say, well, create new switchboard action. Again, we're in the same action button as we were before when we went to find the imposition configs, but now I'm going to create a switchboard action. And when I create a switchboard action, I get to give it a name. So we're going to call this imposition webinar, and I have a description. This does something. It's probably true. So I'm going to fill out name and description and say OK. And nothing happens, but if I go back here, you can see that I now have a new action in the list. It's called imposition webinar. And what I can do with it is either rename it, in which case I get the same dialogue as I had before, or delete it. That does not sound terribly useful. But if I now go to my profile window and I don't create a profile, but I create a process plan, I get an empty process plan. And one of the things that I can do in that process plan, we're going to give it a name first of all, imposition webinar, there we go. In that process plan, one of the things that I can add is an action. So I'm going to do that. And there is a list of actions that shows up here. And if you look in that list, you'll see that one of the items is called imposition webinar. And that's the action that we just saved using the switchboard. So I can select that and save this process plan. And I now have a process plan called imposition webinar. And what does it do? Well, let me go back to my original file. I'm going to actually use the new test mode in pdfToolbox 10. So instead of running this fix-up and modifying my original file and whatever, I'm just going to do tests. And what you get is that action that is executed, and that action as part of the process plan now does exactly the same as what the switchboard itself would have done. And of course, because you can take what you do in the switchboard in this way, save it into an action, and then use that inside of a process plan, this allows for all kinds of very interesting automation scenarios. Yeah, so this is perfect in environments where you want to combine this with other things. And I will show you an example of that. Let me open this. So this is a process plan that first runs a fix-up, and then it runs another process plan that creates a proof. So I can build all kinds of complicated workflows with this. And let me use test again, that's easier. In here, I have the imposition action. You'll see that in a second what gets executed here. What happened was that my original file got rotated. That was just a fix that was added in this process plan. And then there is an imposition action that places my original file on top of a background. And then there is another fix-up that is a place content fix-up that adds all of this text on top of that background and adds the barcode on top of it. This is a very good example of what I said in the beginning, where an imposition step is used as part of a more advanced workflow. And that is what you see here in this process plan. But of course, in real world production workflows, these process plans could be significantly more complex than what we do here. But you'll often find imposition actions in the middle of such a process plan to help do certain tasks in that production workflow. Okay, so this is more or less what I wanted to show in this session, but I do need to say a couple of words on the limitations also of what you can do with pdfToolbox. I already mentioned one in a imposition configuration in pdfToolbox or in an imposition workflow in pdfToolbox, you always have one PDF document coming in and one PDF document coming out. If you have 10 PDFs where each PDF is a single page out of a brochure, and you want to impose them in some way, you will have to merge them into one PDF file, then run the imposition step on it, and that will give you the booklet of that file, for example. So that's one limitation that you have to keep into mind. But of course, as I said, in an automated workflow, it is also possible to combine multiple PDF files together, because there is a merge PDF action in the command line version of pdfToolbox that lets you take multiple PDF files and put those together. The second limitation, although it's not a real limitation anymore, but still, the second limitation is that when you think back to the Sheetconfig and Runlist file, those sheets that you define and the slots that you define typically have fixed values. And that means that if I know that I have files that have a certain size, and I want to place those on, I always want to do something similar with them, then pdfToolbox is very capable of handling that. If I know that I always want to generate the same output size, like what we did in this example for the proof sheet, I always generate an A4 document as a result. And pdfToolbox is very good at handling that. If, on the other hand, I have a workflow where the size of the incoming file is always going to be different, or the size of the outgoing file is always going to be different, it becomes a little bit more complex. And in pdfToolbox 10, there are lots of ways you can work around that. There are some additions to the imposition language itself. I already talked about dynamic imposition, which is imposition where you can dynamically modify values in a slot or the sheet size that is generated. So there are some capabilities there. You also in pdfToolbox have variables and JavaScript variables, so you can do a lot of calculations that are necessary. But this is still one of the limiting factors in a pdfToolbox imposition. Yeah? Let me give you a very good example. If you have a workflow where you expect people, a web-to-print workflow, for example, where you expect people to upload business cards and you don't know in advance what the size of the business cards is going to be, and you want to place them on a sheet, as many as possible, so you want to do ganging or sheet optimization or whatever you want to call it, then pdfToolbox potentially could do a lot of these things, but it will be very difficult to implement because there is a lot of calculation that needs to be done before you could actually tell pdfToolbox what the slots are that you want and start putting content in there. So in those cases, it makes much more sense to look at a different solution. Now, for example, at 4Ps, we also distribute a product called IMP, and IMP has been written from the ground up as a sheet optimization tool. That's exactly what it does. IMP would be way too complex and it would be overkill to use it for very simple impositions, like doing a step and repeat of an incoming business card on a sheet that is always the same size. But if you're in a ganging scenario, or you're in a scenario where you have to deal with files that are not rectangular, but where you have die lines and so on, then IMP would be a much better tool in that kind of workflow. So the advantage of pdfToolbox and the imposition engine in pdfToolbox is that it is very straightforward. Yes, you might have to write these configuration files, but that is often a strength because it allows you to do things that are a little bit special and that you would not be able to do with a typical imposition a tool, if you want. So you have these configuration files, but it's very fast and very straightforward to do imposition. The limitation is that if the incoming formats, the incoming files are always different, if the workflow has to be very flexible, if you want to do ganging, any of those scenarios, then personally, I would probably not look at pdfToolbox, but I would much rather look at a tool like Imp, which is a real imposition tool and ganging tool, and that can handle those types of workflows in a much better way. Okay, that is, I think, what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you very much for joining. I am sure I will see a lot of you in upcoming webinars, either in this support series or others, and have a really great rest of the day.